Good afternoon, everyone. This is still meeting 101 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Thursday, May 31st, 2018. Colleagues, we are now public, and we have before us today the Auditor General of Canada, Mr. Michael Ferguson. Appearing with him is Monsieur Jean Goulet, Principal, as well Philippe Legoff, Principal, Carol McCalla, Principal, and Glenn Wheeler, Principal. On Tuesday of this week, the Auditor General released his spring 2018 audit, and we are here today to meet the Auditor General to discuss the audit that he has brought forward. I would remind you, because we are televised today, to please, if you have a phone, and for those in the audience as well, please put it on silent mode or vibrate so it becomes less distractive. I will now turn this time over to our Auditor General of Canada, Mr. Michael Ferguson. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to discuss our recent audit reports, which were tabled in the House of Commons on Tuesday. But before I describe each audit, I want to stress that right now is a critical moment when the federal government needs to reflect on what I call incomprehensible failures and how government culture stands in the way of achieving successful results for people. In our audit on the Phoenix Pay system, we concluded that that project was an incomprehensible failure of project management and project oversight. We also presented two audits that examined programs for Indigenous people. When I put the findings of those two audits together with the findings of past audits, I also have to characterize as incomprehensible the failure of federal government programs to help improve the situation of Indigenous people in Canada. Je vais maintenant passer au constat.
I'm now going to move to the observations made in each of our audits. The first audit assessed progress achieved by services to Indigenous peoples of Canada by looking at the closing socioeconomic gaps between on-reserve First Nations people and other Canadians. For years, governments have committed to closing these gaps. Nevertheless, Indigenous Services Canada did not have a clear picture of the size of the gaps, and it did not know whether progress was being made to close them. We looked specifically at education, and we calculated that the gap between on-reserve First Nations people with at least a high school diploma and other Canadians widened between 2001 and 2016.
Poor use of the education data it collected. For example, the department spent $42 million over 4 years to prepare First Nation students to enter post-secondary education programs. However, only 8% of those enrolled actually completed this preparatory program. Despite these poor results, the department did not work with First Nations or education institutions to improve the success rate. The second of our audits on Indigenous programs looked at Employment and Social Development Canada's efforts to help Indigenous people build the skills they need to find jobs and stay employed. Malgré des dépenses qui dépassent les 300...
Despite spending over $300 million a year, we found that Employment and Social Development Canada did not know to what extent its programs helped Indigenous peoples find and keep jobs. For example, while 16% of Indigenous clients received 5 or more services, the department could not tell whether those clients made progress in finding and maintaining sustainable employment. Our next audit examined how Global Affairs Canada responded to requests for consular assistance from Canadians abroad. We found that the department deployed staff to help Canadians during a crisis in a foreign country. However, We also found that the department took too long to assess signs of mistreatment or tortures of Canadians detained abroad.
Justice Dennis O'Connor said that Global Affairs Canada needed to train its staff to identify signs of torture and mistreatment and needed to quickly inform the minister of those cases. More than a decade later, we found that the department gave consular staff only general training on how to conduct prison visits and assess whether Canadians had been tortured or mistreated. In one case, we found it took 7 months before the department informed the minister. Passons maintenant à notre audit qui examinait si les...
Now let's look at the audit which looked at whether the Canadian Armed Forces efficiently administered the military justice system.
Often took too long to resolve military justice cases, whether they were for minor discipline offences that led to summary trials or for allegations that were tried before a court-martial. The Canadian Armed Forces had to drop 10 court-martial cases because they failed to move them along as quickly as they should have. Delays run counter to the right of an accused person to have a speedy trial, and they leave victims and their families waiting for answers. The Canadian Armed Forces has known about these problems for at least a decade, but has failed to correct them. Notre prochain audit.
Our next audit looked at how some federal organizations disposed of their surplus goods and equipment. We found that in the year ended March 31st, 2017, government organizations sold assets for $50 million. However, the estimated value of keeping and reusing those assets was $82 million.
A system to reuse its own assets, which allowed it to save $4.5 million over 3 years. This shows that the government can save money through the prudent reuse of its assets. Let's turn now to our audit of the government's project to replace the Champlain Bridge in Montreal. Nous avons constaté que la décision...
We found that the decision to replace the Champlain Bridge should have been made years earlier. Delays in making this decision cost taxpayers over $500 million. The audit found that Infrastructure Canada's analysis of a public-private partnership approach to the project was done after the government had already announced it would use that approach. We also noted weaknesses in the department's analysis. A thorough analysis would have found that there was a high probability that a public-private partnership would be more expensive than a traditional procurement approach. In our opinion, the new bridge will be more expensive than it would have been if the replacement decision had been made earlier. It will cost more than originally planned, and it is uncertain whether it will be completed by the December 2018 deadline.
Second audit of the government's Phoenix pay system. This time we looked at whether the decision to implement the pay system was reasonable. We concluded that the Phoenix project was an incomprehensible failure of project management and project oversight. This meant that the decision to launch Phoenix was wrong. In order to meet budgets and timelines, Public Services and Procurement Canada decided to remove critical pay functions, curtail testing, and forego a pilot implementation of the system. Phoenix executives ignored obvious signs that the Miramichi Pay Centre was not ready to handle the volume of pay transactions, and that Phoenix itself was not ready to correctly pay federal government employees. When the Phoenix executives briefed the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada that Phoenix would launch, they did not mention significant problems that they knew about. Enfin, la décision de déployer Phoenix.
Finally, the decision to launch Phoenix was not documented In our view, based on the information available at the time, the decision to launch Phoenix was not reasonable. Phoenix does not do what it was supposed to do. It has cost hundreds of millions of dollars more than planned, and it has affected tens of thousands of federal government employees and their families. Let's turn now to the results of our audit work in Crown corporations. Since the fall, we completed audits of the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, the Great Lakes Pilotage Authority, Ridley Terminals, Inc., and Export Development Canada.
In all of these corporations. In the case of Ridley Terminals, the issues we noted were so widespread that it meant that the corporation operated outside the prudent practices expected of a Crown corporation. These issues were further compounded by Transport Canada's ineffective oversight of the corporation. Our commentary on the 2016 to 2018 performance audits of Crown corporations explores important problems we found in the 4 audits I just mentioned and in 9 others which we've completed since 2016. For example, we're very concerned that 8 Crown corporations had a significant number of board members whose term had expired. Je veux aussi vous signaler que
I also want to mention that you can find on our website a commentary and video on our 2016-2017 financial audits of government organizations. Before I close and take your questions, I want to once again stress the need for the government and the public service to look at these audits differently, not just as a list of issues that we found in different programs, but as symptoms of a much deeper culture issue. Departments can implement our recommendations and deal with the symptoms we've raised, and that is important. But the real question for the government to think about is, why do we keep finding and reporting serious problems? And why do incomprehensible failures still happen?
Happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. And we'll now move to our first round of questioning, and we will go to Monsieur Massé, please, for 7 minutes.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you for the work that you do with your entire team to make it possible for us politicians to gain a better understanding of the reasons underpinning problems and try to solve them. Of course, I read your reports carefully, as well as what we're calling your Chapter 0, the message from the Auditor General. I would say that I have something of an internal view because, as I've already said, I spent some years in the federal public service, and I know full well that all public service officials, or at least the majority of them, work very hard every day to ensure that they can deliver programs, operations, that their job it is to deliver. No one intends to create a fundamental problem of the kind we're seeing now. Today, my thoughts again are with all public servants who've been affected by Phoenix issues, which are significant, many financial problems causing family issues and problems as well. In your report and in your message, you talk about a culture of obedience that could be at the root of the Phoenix project problems. So I'm trying to scratch my head here. Is it possible that we've had a perfect storm? Let me explain what I mean by a perfect storm. we had a problem that dated back 40 years, a system rather, that dated back 40 years. And I'm not playing politics, but there was a strategy to reduce government costs, that is to ensure that that the department would achieve significant savings. There were pay advisors who were going to retire in massive numbers. Some were due anyway because of the cuts. There was a centralization approach to move everything to Miramichi. Almost all employees who were almost to a last woman or man knew. So there is an element of culture here. Wasn't this a perfect storm? The first thing I want to say is that officials working at the federal government have skills. They're very experienced. They work very hard. But it's just as important to point out that they work in an environment and a culture that can help them complete all their tasks, discharge all their duties, and serve Canadians. I understand. Phoenix was a very complex project with many components and stages and issues, but officials at the federal government should have been able to manage a project of that magnitude and scope and complexity. So it's difficult to understand why we have this incomprehensible failure with Phoenix. It had many difficult aspects, but I should think that public servants should be well aware of managing that complexity if they work in a culture and an environment that supports them in discharging their duties. Thank you. And that brings me to the other question. Public service employees have implemented a great many major projects in recent years. One that was the one to modernize the pension system, a project that was extremely successful, since now over 800,000 former public service employees are getting their pensions through the new system. A group of individuals in Shediac are delivering pensions. In reading your report, we focus responsibility on 3 individuals. And I would have thought, well, in a project like this, there are senior project managers, there are ADMs, there are associate deputy ministers who all took part. There were meetings with some 30 associate deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers who came from different departments. But you said because they weren't part of the official government structure, they're being relieved of responsibility for Phoenix-related issues. So I'd like you to tell me your point of view. I'm going to be frank with you. If I was a deputy minister, an associate deputy minister at a department, and I was told that there were important problems in a project this big that could have an impact on my employees, I would certainly try to put the brakes on it. So please tell me what your point of view is in focusing on 3 individuals as the root of the problems rather than on a broader range of positions that all had a role to play. The purpose of this audit was to explain all the decisions that were made as the project was rolled out. In an audit, what one can do is identify and monitor substantive information. We have to have the facts explained to us. But a deputy minister is responsible for all the decisions and activities in his or her department. So it is very important for a deputy minister to be accountable for such decisions. But with regard to all other deputy ministers, they had no authority in how the project was set up. They pointed out problems, but the response to their concerns was that all the problems were known. There are ways, they were told, of managing the issues. So even though ministers identified problems, no changes were made by project managers. No changes were made to the way they were managing or implementing the project.
General and your team for the incredible work that has been done on all of the reports and, in fact, the message from the Auditor General. I'd like to begin my remarks before asking any questions or making any statements to say that we are incredibly proud of the public service that we have, of the work that they do, and throughout this process of understanding, or at least trying to understand, what happened with the Phoenix issue specifically, it is in no way an attack on our public service. It's actually the opposite, because there are so many people within our public service who have been run afoul financially through the problems that were created with the Phoenix system. And, you know, hearing some of the stories each of us have had people come to our offices, I'm sure, and hearing some of the stories and the issues it created was heartbreaking at times, especially around Christmas time, when there was, quite frankly, paychecks that just didn't show up. Mr. Auditor General, I just want to say that this message, the introductory message to the audits that were completed, is one of the strongest, if not the strongest, document I've seen since I've become a member of Parliament. I think that it represents what people in the public view as what is wrong with government, whether it's an individual or a business. It touches on the lack of measurables or the wrong measurables being in place for announcements or new programming or spending. It touches on the amount of work that our public service has to do kind of watching their behinds, and the amount of work that creates actually for people who are dealing directly with those government services. There's a number of items I wanted to touch on, and before I do, your opening comments today on the page 2, I believe, Indigenous Services Canada made poor use of education data collected. It goes on to say, however, only 8% of those enrolled actually completed this preparatory program. Despite these poor results, the department did not work with First Nations or education institutions to improve the success rate. It is without reason why we are not taking these stats, which are abysmal. Abysmal doesn't describe actually what they are, and not turning it into a process review to come up with a way to have better back-end results for the people that the Government of Canada, in whatever department, is serving. And we saw that message carried out in your message here, where it speaks about, and I'm just going to find it here. Where you speak about Indigenous services, a long-term view has to dominate that file, but because it usually only brings political problems in the short term, government tries to stay in the safe space of administering payments instead of being an active partner with Indigenous people to improve outcomes. The measure of success has become the amount of money spent rather than improved outcomes for Indigenous people. Further down, you say the result is an obedient public service that tries to eliminate risk and mistakes, which of course is not possible. So it tries to avoid responsibility for those mistakes. In this culture, for a public servant, it is often better to do nothing than to do something that doesn't work out. If, however, action can't be avoided, people search for plausible deniability, a way to deny responsibility for a mistake. The culture which you speak about in this document, the culture of the entire government, yes, you're talking about some specific audits that took place in Phoenix, where you talk about the catastrophe which is Phoenix. But really you talk about government as a whole, the culture within the Government of Canada as a whole. And the premise for it is that the politics are done on such a short-term view that it creates a long-term issue within government as a whole in terms of change management and so on and so forth. I was wondering if you can provide us, you end this by saying that I don't have the answer, essentially. You know, I don't have the answer, but hopefully by identifying that the issue exists, that will be the first step. Could you provide us with a couple of instances of previous audits that you were thinking about when you were putting these words together, where you've provided the audit, the process changes have either been put in place or not put in place, yet we still have the exact same results?
Well, I guess quickly I would just refer to two audits that that we have in this one. One is on the military justice system, where 10 years ago there was a report that indicated that there were a number of problems with how the military justice system operated and that those should be changed. We came along and did an audit that we're reporting on here, and we found the same problems 10 years after that. So, you know, again, that's a case where there were some very important recommendations made to improve a system, but for some reason that wasn't done. And the other one being the audit on Global Affairs Canada that we have, you know, looking at their consular services, again, more than or about 10 years ago. Justice O'Connor did an inquiry into the Maharare case that indicated that there were things that Global Affairs Canada needed to do to change how its consular services supported Canadians who were detained abroad. We came along and 10 years later, or at least 10 years later, find that many of those same issues are there, and that the training the department provided was just cursory training and was not detailed training about how those consular officers should be conducting prison visits of Canadians who have been detained abroad. So I think, you know, we just see the same types of things happening, you know, 10 years after 10 years, and I think that's very much an indication that the culture is getting in the way.
Absolutely. I like to say good information makes for good decision making, but if you don't put that information to use, it's never going to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Auditor General, do you feel, and this is a yes or no question if that's okay, do you feel that you have all of the answers you were looking for on the Phoenix pay system now that you've conducted the second report?
I feel we have all the answers we were looking for, but again, an audit can only go so far. We don't get access to the cabinet room and that sort of thing. So, you know, and many of the discussions with the deputy minister were not documented. So I think we got what we needed to with what we were looking for, but an audit can only go so far.
So there's still questions outside of what you were looking for in the audit that need to be answered. So, Mr. Chair, in the based on that, I'd like to put the following motion forward, that the Auditor General's message is unprecedented, and that the purpose of the message is to explore the cause of incomprehensible failures in government. And I move that we invite the Clerk of the Privy Council to help answer why Phoenix failed and in the government's highly controlled environment, and how it was possible for Phoenix to actually happen in the beginning.
Can we get a copy of that? Is the motion in order? Okay, so the motion is in order. Mr. Nuttall, I don't know, I guess you can speak to your motion if you want, or if there is any, are we in agreement? We have spoken to different members of different parties, and they seem to be in agreement with this.
Know the text of the motion. If you could give us notice of the motion, because I would have an amendment to put in there.
What would your amendment be?
It has to do with the scope of the, it's not about Phoenix only. It's a lot,
So
you know, so I would,
just
it's
in
not
regards
about,
to
well, put
the...
your eyepiece, the acoustics here are terrible. It's
So,
not,
so her concern is that you're just focusing on the Phoenix,
Phoenix, and it's
rather
not
than
about Phoenix,
Indigenous
yeah.
and rather than the whole
yeah,
scope of the
culture,
audit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
But I mean, it's not properly done, so I would like just
Can
to
you-
give notice, and we can propose
Actually,
the amendment.
Mr. Chair, if I may, it is actually properly done. Since we're discussing the matter at hand, we can bring forward the motion
No,
without,
I understand.
without notice,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
I know it's in order. I
Yeah.
know it's in
Yeah.
order, but to,
Okay, so
for me
just
to
through
make
the
the
chair,
amendment,
through
I
the
have to
chair.
look at it.
Did you want to make an amendment to that?
Absolutely,
And then we
yes.
can at least come out of here saying, yes,
Well,
we've
can
decided.
I see it then,
So,
please?
Mr. Angus, on that?
Well, I'm very interested in working with my colleagues on the motion. I think it should be done right. But we do have the Auditor General here, and we're in televised. I would at least prefer to at least get a chance to ask some questions while they work on the motion, and we can
Okay.
finish this off before we leave at 5:30.
Unfortunately, Ms. Mendez, will you would then work on a motion? We do have a motion on the table here. Maybe can we? Is there a process where we can set the motion
Defer
aside,
it?
continue
We
on?
can defer it, yeah?
Okay, so is that all right with the mover if we defer it until a time where we get the
I can make an amendment.
amendment that's going to show the full scope of the audit, and that way we can carry on with other questions to our Auditor General?
Yes, Mr. Chair, as long as it's done today, I think it's a part of our reaction.
Are we good to defer to the last 10 minutes
Leave the
of
last five, yeah.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you to the mover and to Ms. Mendez on the amendment. Mr. Angus, welcome here.
Thank you,
Your time.
Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ferguson. And I want to say at the outset the enormous respect I have for the work that you and your predecessor did on shining a light into the black hole that is Indigenous Affairs and now Indigenous Services. This day is the 8th anniversary of the death of Shannon Kustashian, who was the youth leader who had never seen a real school, living in a country like Canada. And she fought for education. I find it appalling that after every report that your department has come out with, that we're still talking about the, quote, incomprehensible failure. If a department refuses to put the interests of children first, there's nothing incomprehensible about the failure. This is a predictable outcome. What's incomprehensible is how governments and departments year in, year out could have such a disregard for children, the children of Canada. I want to just start right off on page 13 where you talked about the importance of literacy. In 2013, 2014, Indigenous Affairs, for the first time that I ever remember, did a report called the Success Program, where they listed the literacy and numeracy rates. And in Ontario region, the literacy rate for boys was 21%. The numeracy rates was 18%, 20% for girls. For the Waterloo Public Board, the literacy rates are 85%, and yet the government or the department at that time announced in the same report that they were discontinuing keeping track because they thought the money could be spent better elsewhere. So I ask you, from what your concerns about literacy, what better thing could a department that looks after children's education spend money on than finding out whether or not children can read?
Mr. Ferguson.
So, again, I think the audit certainly did point out to the fact that there has not been improvement in the education outcomes of First Nations on reserve students. We've been doing audits in this area for almost 20 years. Again, the thing that I would want to add to what you said is literacy is one of the most important things. It's the literacy outcomes that need to happen. So the money is the enabler, but they need to make sure that the money is spent in a way that's going to get outcomes. And that's why, I referred to the fact that over 4 years the government spent $42 million on a preparatory program to help prepare First Nations on reserve people to go on and take post-secondary education, but only 8% of them completed that preparatory program, let alone how many of those 8% actually went on. So there needs to be, it can't just be about the amount of money spent. There needs to be also, a connection to say, and that money is going in the right places, and it is achieving the outcomes it's supposed to achieve.
Well, I mean, one of the fundamental principles of education is you have comparable data. Our public system produces some of the highest quality education in the world, and yet Indigenous Affairs has no comparisons with children in the provincial system, no idea how the management of programs, no attempt to actually identify the education gap that exists. And I find on page 17 you say that they misrepresented the graduation rates, which they claimed were 46%, when the real number was 24%. I would put it to you from the communities that I've been in, where I see young people dropping out in grade 6 and 5 because they're so hopelessly behind, that these numbers might be even higher. But how can we allow a system to run when they don't even bother to find the comparisons with other students who are in the same provincial mandated curriculum?
Well, and the premise of this whole audit was governments talk often about the need to close that socioeconomic gap that exists between on-reserve First Nations people in particular and other Canadians. And the first thing we identified was they aren't measuring what that socioeconomic gap is, and the information they do have is based on census information. So the most recent, and they haven't updated it for the 2016 census, so the most recent numbers they have on what they call their Community Well-Being Index comes from 2011. So they need to have a much better way of identifying what is the socioeconomic gap, how do they measure it, how do they know what's happening to it. And when we looked at the specifics of education, as I said earlier, something that we've looked at almost 20 years ago, we saw that there has not been any improvement in the socioeconomic, the education outcomes, the gap in education outcomes between the rest of Canadians and First Nations on reserve students.
Well, thank you for that. What concerns me is that you identify in your report that back in 2000, Indigenous Affairs committed that they would start to get comparable numbers. I believe in 2004, the Auditor General asked for that, maybe 2011, they followed up. In 2016, the Parliamentary Budget Officer asked where those comparable numbers were, and this department hadn't bothered to get the numbers. To me, this is not a failure. This is systemic negligence. If this was in the provincial system, heads would roll, but with Indigenous Affairs, it's just another day at the office. How can we be looking at a report today where they haven't bothered to gather information they were told to get 18 years ago? For a child who was in grade 8 then, their kids are in the same broken system. I've got kids who are dropping out. We're losing a generation after generation of young people because of this negligence. How do you hold them to account to say, if you are not going to bother to even track the numbers that you're ordered to by the Auditor General, you shouldn't be allowed anywhere near programs for children?
Mr. Chair, the only thing that I can say is in the course of these audits, we identify these issues. The departments will come back and say that they are going to do something. They will always agree with our recommendations, and they say they're going to implement something, but too often when we go back and do another follow-up audit, we find that they haven't done it.
But it's 18 years of kids' lives that they didn't bother to track.
So there's no way I can explain that. That's the department that is going to have to explain that. We are, I guess, as disappointed as anybody when we see that issues that we raised many years ago aren't followed up on, and not just issues that we raise, but issues that come out of other reports, as I mentioned, in those other types of areas. So there are many different ways that government programs are evaluated and recommendations are made to make improvements, and it's extremely discouraging for us to come back and find out that departments have committed to do something, and then we find out that they haven't done it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Angus, good questions. We'll now move to Mr. Area, the last one in the 7-minute round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the Auditor General and his team for the excellent report they have done on various departments. I would like to ask the Auditor General on Phoenix. All project management problems related to Phoenix can be traced, in my opinion, to one single decision. That is in your para 1.32. You mentioned that in spring of 2012, after planning phase of Phoenix, IBM told Public Services Procurement Canada that Phoenix would cost $274 million to build and implement. You also mentioned that the Treasury Board had approved only $155 million in 2009. So the approved amount was approximately 55% only of the expected cost to build and implement Phoenix. And you also mentioned that Public Service and Procurement Canada did not consider asking Treasury Board for more money to build and implement Phoenix. So if you ask me, all the problems that are associated with this big complex project is due to this one single thing. I would like to focus on that and ask, who are the people who made the decision not to ask Treasury Board for the full required amount?
There's no way for us to know that. All we know is that the department did not go back to Treasury Board, and in our opinion, they should have gone back to Treasury Board either to ask for more money or to tell Treasury Board that they've had to cut back on the functionality of the system, and by cutting back on the functionality of the system, that system would not be able to produce the $70 million a year in savings that they originally said it would. So they had a responsibility to go back one way or the other.
So you mentioned several times the 3 Phoenix executives who took decision subsequently, but coming back to this decision, not asking the Treasury Board, do you think it was limited only to the 3 Phoenix executives, or the decision was taken by the Deputy Minister, because this is a very significant difference in the amount that was required?
Again, it's impossible to say, because of course it's a decision that it was a decision that they did not make. So there's no documentation of a decision that something they decided not to do. So, again, that would all have been through conversations. There's no way for us to know exactly why it was decided not to go back. Our point is, even if they decided not to go back for more money, they should have gone back to say, now this project will not deliver the savings that it was supposed to deliver. So regardless of who made the decision, at the end of the day, they had a responsibility to go back to Treasury Board.
However, in my view, the decision not to ask the Treasury Board is very critical here, because we are talking of close to $120 million difference here. So don't you think that a decision of this magnitude will not be just at the Phoenix executive level? It will not even be just at the level of the Deputy Minister. It has to go to the ministerial level. Don't you think that this decision, or whether to ask or not to ask, or to proceed with this very, very limited budget, has been taken with keeping the minister's office into confidence?
Again, there's no way for us to know, who would have been involved in making the decision not to go back and ask for more money.
Don't you think that is something worth exploring? But because if you ask, go to 1.33, 1.34, 1.32, all the things that have been removed is only due to the fact that this project was taken up with just 55% of the amount that is required to implement this, build and implement this. So don't you think that this is a very significant thing that we have to go much more in depth to find what happened, who are the people involved?
So again, I guess that would be a decision of the committee, what it wants to do. The audit can only go so far. This was a regular performance audit on the decisions that were made and the way the project was managed. So all we can do is follow the trail of decisions, and there's nothing that explains why they decided not to go back and ask for more money.
Mr. Chair, I think we should take a note of the Auditor General answer that it is left to the committee to probe this further, because you can read the entire report. When you look at the entire report, it all boils down to one single thing, that a project of this magnitude was taken up to build and implement with just 55% of the estimated cost. So naturally, compromises, major compromises has to be made. And what we are facing is today is only because of those compromises that were made. And in your statement, para 31, you said that Phoenix executives briefed the Deputy Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada that Phoenix would launch. They did not mention significant problems that they knew about. Yes, that is quite clear. But don't you think the Deputy Minister was aware of all the things that were taken out of the original plan? For example, you state in 1.33 that, the pay processing functions, they knew that they deferred or they removed the ability to process requests for retroactive pay. They deferred or removed the ability to automatically calculate certain types of pay, such as increases in pay for acting appointments. Do you think the Deputy Minister was not aware that these were deferred or removed from the system?
So I think the important thing to remember is over this time period, 3 different people served in the role of Deputy Minister of that department. So the reference that I made in my opening statement was to the briefing that the executives made to the Deputy Minister who was in place at the time of the decision to launch. That would not have been the same person who was in the Deputy Minister's chair in these earlier decisions.
Very much, Mr. Area. We'll now move to Mr. McCauley, please. Mr. McCauley.
Great. Thanks, gentlemen and Madam. IBM sent registered letters to the Deputy Minister and the Assistant Deputy Minister around the December, January, advising them, as my friend here would say, cover their butts issue, not to go ahead with the launch. Have you seen those letters, or did they come up as part of your study?
So I can't speak to all of the different pieces of information that we've seen. Again, the report is the synthesis of all of the evidence that we gathered. So, specific types of documents or conversations, I don't have all of those details. But when that's what the report is supposed to do, is not provide all of that level of detail, but provide you an overview of what happened.
Preventing future Phoenixes, again, IBM twice actually sent the registered letters, first one and then a follow-up again, stressing systems not ready, do not go ahead. Should we write issues like this into future contracts, almost a duty of care of contractors, so that they are going public with such information, almost a whistleblowing type clause to help contractors bring up this issue?
Again, that's not something that I can comment on. In this particular project, it was the 3 Phoenix executives who had the responsibility for making the decisions. So any external contractors didn't have any authority to say, no, this isn't going ahead. It was the 3 Phoenix executives that had that authority.
It's interesting because the letters did go to the Deputy Minister and the Assistant Deputy Minister outside of the Phoenix executive, advising them of the issues. With regard with we've talked a lot about the Phoenix executives, almost the rogue executives. referred to in the report, do you have concerns that this is a systematic problem throughout other projects being managed within the government? And should we be concerned about the integrity of how the other projects are being managed by PSPC and other departments?
So we're not doing any audits right now of any other systems, but I think in my message, I did indicate that I am very concerned that there will be another, what I referred to as incomprehensible failure at some point in the future, because just putting in some additional rules or policies, I don't think is going to be sufficient to make sure that type of a failure is avoided in the future.
Example I'm thinking of, the Parliamentary Budget Officer put out a report on the costing of the combat ships being done in Halifax. Under the Parliament Act, he's entitled to receive information that he's asked for. DND, PSPC has refused to release the RFP as well as the statement of requirements from the project. And I'm just worried on this is a $100 billion project, the largest ever handled in Canadian history, that we're walking down the same path with the same issues of secrecy and working in silos to prevent accountability and transparency. Is this something we should be greatly concerned about, where we have the Parliamentary Budget Officer entitled under the Act of Parliament to receive this information, but there's bureaucracy refusing to release documents to him?
I can't speak to any specific situations outside of what we have in our audits. We do have audit information on a number of different issues. That's not something that we have audited, but I think again I would go back to the message that I indicated, where it's very important, I believe, to look to the core reasons that we end up with incomprehensible failures to make sure they don't happen on any future project.
Does something like this look like it's one of these incomprehensible actions that is currently going on, where we have one division of government refusing to follow an act of Parliament, which is releasing information to the PBO? In fact, he's actually had to go to the States to get comparable data to try and cost out our ship plan.
So again, that's not something that I can comment on. I don't have any information on that.
Okay. You've noticed in your report, your comment, the decision to launch Phoenix was wrong. We've heard this repeatedly. We've heard of all the other issues. What would the alternative have been at the time? Delay it a bit more till these items were fixed, addressed? Worked out a bit more?
So again, I think as was talked about earlier on, I think that the original decision point of cutting back on the functionality of the system really caused a lot of the problems, and things needed to be resolved at that point. And it all started to build from there. So you would have, if the project had been managed the right way all along, you would have hoped that that would have been identified much earlier rather than at the last minute. To say, well, I guess we better not launch this. So yes, it could have been, it would have been better to find a way to continue on with the old system at that point in time. But even that would have been, an 11th hour, 59th minute decision. And really, to have avoided this, better decisions needed to have been made all the way along.
There was no risk to delaying it, so. But I understand what you're saying. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have been able to work with Ms. Alexander, and Ms. Alexander. I apologize. I'm glad she's not within earshot. Ms. Mendez is correct. And so I'm going to defer back to Mr. Nuttall, and he will bring a motion that has been amended and worked on by both. Go ahead, Mr. Nuttall. Yes.
Chair, Ms. Mendez is not here. Can we just wait a pause for 30 seconds?
All right. Then, Mr. McCauley, you still have a few moments if you wanted to ask some more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I guess we've got a few minutes, so I'll let you, 4 minutes, I'll let you just speak out. We've read a report about, the First Nations, Phoenix, the bridge, all this lack of oversight, et cetera. What do you think should be our next steps? I mean, I'm thinking of, the $60 to $100 billion monster with the shipbuilding where we can't get information, Mr. Angus can't get answers. What do you think our next step should be?
So in the course of our audits, again, we made a number of recommendations that would be aimed at fixing process. So that's one thing. But in the message, that's where we identified that Phoenix should not have happened. There should not have been any way for Phoenix to happen, given all of the different controls that exist within government. But somehow it did happen. So therefore, there needs to be some sort of an examination of what are the cultural reasons within government that allowed it to happen.
I appreciate your time. I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Nuttall. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to move the motion that was agreed on between, I believe, all the parties. I move that we invite the Clerk of the Privy Council to address the message of the Auditor General in the Spring Report 2018, and I'll leave that on the floor, Mr. Chair. I don't think it really requires any more statements, certainly from this side, and I'm glad that we could all be nonpartisan and move forward on getting some more answers.
Thank you. And Ms. Mendez asked for a moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And while I absolutely support the motion, and I told you I would like time to confer with my colleagues, because this message goes way beyond the mandate of this current clerk, and I would like to confer and bring it to the next meeting, if at all possible, for the vote.
Mr. Nuttall?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what really we would need to talk about. Or you with your colleagues. I assume we either want to get answers or we don't. And one of the things I admire about this committee is that it is nonpartisan. So if we could push for a vote, that would be fantastic.
Mr. Angus and Mr. Area.
Thank you. Well, I'm a visitor to your committee. I would just point out as an outsider that an agreement was made to allow questioning to continue on the condition that a decision was made, because Mr. Nuttall could have held the floor and stopped the Auditor General from speaking. So I think just out of respect, it should be, we should deal with this tonight.
All right, Mr. Area.
Mr. Chair, I would like to know that is there any advance, is there any notice be given before a motion is placed for decision making?
That question I asked the clerk, and the answer is no. It doesn't, because it's coming out of the Auditor General's report. So it's not a substantive motion that is against the report, that somebody might have a motion for something that wasn't dealing. So motions do come out of meetings that we have like this. So I'm told it's in order.
My objection to the motion is that we have the Auditor General here, we have the important questions to ask, and to cut that short to discuss a motion of this, I think it's a waste of time for the committee, and when important witnesses are present here.
Thank you, Mr. Area. The only problem was we did have an agreement between that we would hold off to the last 5 minutes. And so that's, Mr. Area, I have the floor.
Sorry.
And so, you know, we had moved along, we had gone ahead with the, as Mr. Angus said, with the questions to our Auditor General, holding off the last 5 minutes. And so, you know, I'm still going to, I think, have to call the question. And then we will just have to take it from there. Mr. Area.
Mr. Chair, when you talk about agreement, I understand that you did talk to Alexander Mendez, who is the Vice Chair, but I think every single member of the committee is as important as any other member.
We'll call the question. All those in favor of Mr. Nuttall's motion? All those opposed? All those in favor of Mr. Nuttall's motion? All those opposed? It carries. We're adjourned.